Superintendent of Public Instruction. I'd like to call the State Board of Education meeting for October 14th to order. If we could have the roll call, please.
Present. Here. Here.
Present.
Present.
Here.
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 Here, thank you. If you would all join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item of business is the approval of the agenda. It's Carrie.
I have to leave for parent conferences, and that being pretty important to me to make sure I get to meet those 60 parents and talk to their kids about how they're doing. I had the opportunity to attend part of the cut score setting and would like to move that up in the agenda so that I could hopefully, if we get to that point, could be a part of that discussion.
Duly noted. So we'll move item G to item C in the place and new business right after the resolutions.
Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate that.
Any other changes to the agenda? Seeing none, those in favor of approval of the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The agenda is approved. Next, we have the approval of the minutes. There's a motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a second? Any discussion or changes to the minutes? All those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Oh, sorry, Gordon. The minutes are approved. Next item is the statement from the chair. I would like to report on just a few things. First of all, dual credit conversation has begun here in the state of Indiana in earnest. On October 6th, at the we reorganized the advisory board for dual credit, and we met on October 6th, and we talked about the issue and talked about possible solutions as we go forward. We have another meeting that's scheduled for November 23rd. In addition, as the Superintendent of Public Instruction for the state of Indiana, I'm a member of the organization CCSSO, where all the chiefs meet on a pretty regular basis. And so November 19th, we're going to be meeting with the 19 states that is under the jurisdiction of the Learning Commission, of the Higher Ed Commission, and talk about this issue also in a concerted effort. In addition, I've been in contact with Minnesota's superintendent, who is also highly upset regarding the parameters for dual credit, and so the conversation will continue. I don't know, Vince, I know you were at that meeting, if you wanted to add anything to that?
I think you covered it, but I do think there's a great sense of concern among those participating in how we resolve the dual credit. So I do appreciate your taking leadership role and working with other state chiefs and with CCSO to see if we can't come together and help with a better resolution. So thank you.
Thank you. Also, I was very excited yesterday to be inducted into the Jefferson High School Hall of Fame, which is my alma mater. But what I really want to say is that Hall of Fames that are at our high schools are just a wonderful event and for the community. And this one was particularly fun because it had actually involved all the juniors and the seniors actually attended the ceremony. So all of the inductees, gave their comments to the children. So that was a great honor. Also, the Teacher of the Year, Jean Russell from Southwest Allen. It was my pleasure to be at that celebration just not too long ago. And then also the superintendent, the Superintendent of the Year, Dr. Margaret Horniman from Avon. What a pleasure it is for her to serve as the Superintendent of the Year. And we will have special recognition for both of those educators here in just a little bit. And then the David C. Ford Innovation Technology Planning Grant, $30,000 to 13 schools. So we're very excited to be able to put out the information regarding the planning grant. And that will be, I think it'll be released today, actually. All right, board member comments and reports.
Just a quick
Yes, Steve?
couple of items. I want to also reinforce my appreciation of your efforts in the dual credit issue, and it's becoming more and more of an issue as the word gets out there as to what the consequences of the Higher Learning Commission's recommendations may be, but also recognize the work of Commissioner Lubbers and thank her for her efforts. The diploma issue continues to grow, and I don't know about the rest of the board members, but I received many emails and letters and contacts regarding the diploma issue, and was anxious to see where that goes. 2 or 3 months ago, I asked for, excuse me, what are the consequences of CTB McGraw-Hill's failure to comply with their contract? Have we had any progress on that report?
Bernice from legal?
Nothing there. Have they ever been?
Oh, yes, we sent the initial letter and we'll be proceeding.
Oh, here. Thank you.
Everyone.
Good morning.
In terms of what's occurring with CTB regarding what we see as a breach, the department is represented by the Attorney General's office. Are you able to hear me?
Department is represented by whom?
The Attorney General's office.
Okay.
So we're currently working to deal with the breach of contract as we see it.
Okay. Have they ever been found in violation of their contract?
So that's all a process. The contract has, it's called a liquidated damages clause in it. And there are certain key performance dates that CTB committed to make. It's our position that they did not make their key performance date. And so the moment they don't make a key performance date, it triggers this calendar, and each day that they are remiss in making their key performance, the dollars rack up. But it isn't a matter of, either this gets resolved by a settlement or it gets resolved by litigation.
Have they ever been found in violation since we've been using CTB in violation of their contract?
Yes. When there was the testing debacle, we have had a prior settlement with CTB before,
What was
yes.
that settlement?
The dollar amount, or?
What was it in general?
We had a settlement agreement with them, and I can provide you with it. It's been a while ago. I can't quite remember it off the top of my head, but they gave us some in-kind services, as well as there was a dollar amount as well.
Such as, in-kind services such as?
I truly can't remember. I can send you an email and provide it to you.
I wouldn't want it personally, but I would want it, but I would hope we could get it to all board members so they could be updated.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to, and the prior members have seen it before. It's public, so I can forward it to you and to everyone else on the board.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Madam Superintendent.
Oh, Carrie?
And I would like to just say, last week I got to attend the cut score setting as an observer, and the week before I was part of the content review, and hundreds of teachers from across the state come and participate. And so, first of all, for the teachers who are not, there's kind of a way to sign up. If you're interested in doing things, just really encourage any teacher out there to sign up, to apply, because it's such a great learning experience, such great professional development. But thanks to, just lots of people who are giving up classroom time and making sub-plans and stuff to participate in those things, because they're the experts, and it's fun to be a part of it, because to be with them and to learn from everybody. And so thanks to all of them, and thanks to, I want to, in particular, Erin Thompson on the DOE staff did a great job, and she just kept everybody on task and on time, and she knows her stuff, and so thanks to her also.
Thank you very much. Yes. Leanne?
I attended a day of assist training, and I'm hearing concerns from different principals and district staff across the state regarding the requirement that this year school improvement plans need to be entered into the Advanced Ed Assist template. Just the timing for this time of year when schools already have plans. I know that we're still waiting for ISTEP information, but schools use multiple data points when they're making plans. And so to start this late date and enter information when we really need to be moving forward to look at information to create new plans for next year. A lot of leaders were saying that that was going to just be a burden for them. We also have many high-performing schools and districts that have great processes already, and they don't see the need to be required to use a new process.
Thank you, Leanne. I actually have an upcoming October 21st stakeholder meeting where that's going to be the topic of discussion, because we too have heard about the concerns. So we plan to address them and work through the process and see what that might entail when we finish our dialogue. So thank you so much for bringing that. Yes.
Good morning. I have a question on the Advanced Ed contract. Do we have a signed contract with them? With Advanced Ed?
It's not completed yet, no.
It's not completed yet, but we're asking schools to provide information and use the platform?
We've already been approved for the sole source contract, already been approved.
So the state has approved the contract already?
They approved the sole source, they approved us to have a sole source with Advanced Ed for the work that we're doing, yes.
Could we get a copy of that signed contract that's authorized by the state beyond DOE?
So I think we're talking about two different things.
Okay.
When we get permission to move forward with the contract, we already begin conversation with the vendor, just like we do with Pearson as we going forward, because we do not have a signed contract yet with Pearson either. But the signed contract, it's not signed yet, but we are already in the process of working with the vendor and providing the services going forward with that approval.
So what happens if someone at the higher levels in the state does not approve the contract from DOE? What happens to Advanced Ed? What happens to schools that have been entering data into this platform?
So we don't anticipate that happening. So once we get approval for the contract to move forward, that's the department's okay to move forward. So I guess if that happens, we'll have to deal with it.
I just have a concern that we're having schools enter information into a platform. We don't have an officially approved contract with Advanced Ed. I'm nervous placing schools into a position of potentially entering data going through professional development with Advanced Ed when we don't have a state-approved contract. I just want to get that on record.
I hear your concern.
Thank you.
And if I may
oh,
finish, and then another concern then would be if that contract doesn't continue, then we have many schools learn a new format and a new platform only, a couple years down the line for that to go away. So that's just another concern with many of our school folks.
And as I said, we're going to be addressing that at my advisory stakeholder meeting. Thank you. All right, we are ready for general comment.
One more item.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yes, Gordon, sorry. I keep forgetting you're there, sorry. Go ahead.
And I apologize if it's hard to hear. I know that's sometimes the case. I have a few short comments regarding today's agenda and some other issues. First off, since our last board meeting, we learned that the United States Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, was submitting his resignation, and I just wanted to offer my praise for his service to this country and our school children in pushing important issues, including pre-K for all kids, increasing standards in our schools, and increasing accountability for our education system. And what that means, I think, is improved education across this country. So I'm grateful for his service, and several of us had the opportunity to meet with him personally when he was in Indiana last month, and it was a privilege. And we look forward to working with the new United States Department of Education Secretary Dr. John King, who has a distinguished record of his own. So I wanted to offer those comments first. Second, I continue to be troubled by the treatment of Title I dollars with the charter schools. And, you know, we have learned that information has been presented to the board informally that there has been some real challenges in working with the United States Department of Education on this with the department. And I would just urge the department to resolve this issue as quickly as possible. And it's even my understanding that we've wrapped up close to $100,000 in public funds to a D.C. law firm to date to represent the state on this issue, and I think we need to put this issue behind us. Title I dollars, as you know, Superintendent, are federal funds geared towards our most disadvantaged and needy children in our schools, and charter schools are public schools, and those kids deserve what's entitled to them. Finally, as it relates to the I-STEP cut source that we'll be considering later today, I am very concerned about another October surprise that appears to have arisen late last night and may affect our ability to vote on the cut scores today. This further delay and confusion really does a disservice to our teachers and our school children, as well as our parents. And it's just very disappointing that that this has arisen. And I also have concerns about the public comments of the department relating to I-STEP testing in general, questioning the fairness of our accountability system, and I just think that's extremely disappointing. I think it's your job, Superintendent, to go out and tell parents what is coming and help them understand that this is good for Indiana and that we are, with our new college and career standards, we are going to be raising the bar for education in Indiana, and that's a good thing in the long term. So we shouldn't be looking to continue to pause accountability. You know, this is not Lake Wobegon. Our parents and our school children deserve to know where they stand and how they can improve, and how we as policymakers can improve Indiana's education system so that every child goes to college or career with an understanding of where they stand, as well as an ability for our teachers and principals and others to make sure that they receive the best education they can. Thank you very much.
And many of your topics we'll be addressing later on in the meeting, so I'll be glad to provide comment then.
Yeah, thank you. Looking down the agenda under discussion, assessment and accountability, and when we see DOE and Pearson update, I'm assuming we'll hear how CTB's progress is to providing data to Pearson is moving forward.
Sure, it's my understanding everything's on track.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Next, we have general public comment. Sue Dillon. And Sue, you will have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to address you today and bring to your attention several very concerning statistics that have developed within the last 10 years since Indiana's sunlight schedule was shifted by 1 hour with the adoption of Eastern Daylight Time. Since 2009, 6 years, statistics show that Indiana teens have the second highest suicide rate of any state in the United States. Since 2010, 5 years ago, Indiana's teens have the highest death rate due to car crashes of any state in the United States. Currently, 55,000 Indiana students are chronically absent from school each year, with the majority opting to sleep in and be truant. Indiana students and adults now rank as the 7th most obese and least physically fit in the United States. All of these are affected by adverse sunlight schedules. Last year, 62,000 American pediatricians announced a strong policy statement regarding the effects of adverse sunlight schedules on students, in which they state that a sunlight schedule that is out of sync with students' biological clocks impedes scholastic performance and results in students being chronically sleep deprived, which endangers health, both mental and physical, and jeopardizes the safety of teen drivers. And that's exactly what we're seeing in Indiana. They say that school for teens should not start before 8:30 a.m. However, in Indiana's eastern time counties, this equates to 9:30 a.m., and that's an impossibility. In this letter that has been delivered to you, I elaborate on this much more, and I explain that the original problem occurred in the 1960s when Indiana was moved from the central time zone to the eastern time zone. 50 school boards understand the advantages of an additional hour of sunlight in the morning and have signed resolutions supporting the restoration of central time to Indiana. Quoting one school board president, "For Indiana schools, central time is a no-brainer." We ask you to give careful consideration to the issues we raise in this letter and to listen to what the experts have to say about the effects of incompatible sunlight schedules on students. If you agree with our conclusions, please, for the sake of Indiana students, let our General Assembly and our governor know that they need to bring this discussion forward. Bring it out of the closet and face it straight on. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much, Sue.
Your letter is with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for passing
So
that out to us.
I do have a question. So
Yes,
you're suggesting that schools can't just adjust their starting times if they have concerns?
9:30? Well, it's impractical.
Pardon?
It's impractical for schools to start at 9:30 because parents have to be to work, children have to be, If you have another hour of sunlight, if we are restored to this, we're not going to do away with daylight saving time. That eliminated the confusion for businesses, and we're not suggesting that. So the problem started with the switch in time zones. And, on October 30th, the sun will rise at 8:30, or 8:15 in Indianapolis. Franklin Township Middle
that's
School
fine.
starts at 7:10.
Okay. Thank you. Just one other question. Are you aware of any studies that have been done on this other than just, you stated statistics and you've drawn conclusions from these statistics, but are there any other studies that you're aware of that have been done?
Absolutely. I have all of them. I provided them to you last year, a lot of them. I'll be glad to provide them to you again. I didn't attach them to this.
That actually cause or show causation for some of these outcomes?
Absolutely. Yes.
I'd
These
like-
are all
I'd like
based
to
on
see that.
statistics.
Great, thank you.
Would you like me to send those to you? I'll be
I'd
glad
love to see them, yes. If you could cite those, that'd be great, thank you. Thanks for your time.
Yes, I cite them. I haven't made them up, I promise
I
you.
wasn't suggesting that, I wanted to see the studies in which this information's been extrapolated, so that'd be very helpful, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Larry Vaughn? You have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much for this meeting, and I think that more people that are watching this on the television need to come down here because this is where our TART emits from. And I also object to having any colored members on your board because I look to IPS and I see what's really happening. It's a de jure segregation, and this board, every move that they have made supports that, And when I say that they support it, that you support it, is because you maybe have some interest in the proliferation of charter schools here in the IPS district. The IPS district, over the years, I've watched it go through many changes. One of them is that they're trying to defund the IPS school system right now. And just the studying, and just as a parent, that they are trying to move all the little Negro kids out of IPS. They don't want them there, and they're funneling them to charter schools. Now, when they do this, they're funneling these kids, and you know very well, if you would look to Article 8 of our Constitution, they're trying to funnel them out. You say that charter schools are public schools. They are not public schools. They cannot demand their funding from the state legislature. They cannot operate at cost. Every other school district around this center part of this state has no problems with their funding, because in 1851, when we had our Constitution, we had in there a clause that said the common schools could work at cost. But this board has done nothing. But in areas where there's large concentration of Negroes, all they've done is to have these Negroes funnel into a charter school that cannot demand their funding from the state of Indiana. And what the result of this is a school opening. I'll give you Fall Creek Academy, opening for a short time, and getting a flow of kids coming through, and then stigmatizing them with some disease or some malformity or something that they can medicate them for. I looked at Fall Creek Academy in their last days. They were bringing kids in on gurneys. That's only so that they can get the Title I money that you're talking about, fill their coffers, and then go out of business. So you have to know, you're supposed to be intelligent people that sit on this board. You have to know that you can look to our statute books, even from the 20s and 30s, when our schools were segregated. We were not facing this problem. Our kids were learning how to read. You may sit on this board, you may think that you're doing something to further this state, but what you're actually doing is you're subjecting a whole class of Negro kids and poor white kids to a situation where they're going to be set for the prison system and other derogatory things in our society. The first statement of our Constitution says a uniform system of common schools. And with our transit society nowadays, people being foreclosed on, moving from town to town, what more better can you have than a system of uniform common schools that can operate at cost, so that when you move from town to town, you're getting the same message?
Thank you,
We're
sir.
not getting that now.
Thank
so
you,
I
sir.
just like you consider that.
Thank you. Todd Bass?
I'm sorry.
Oh, question? Yes, Eddie?
Sorry. I appreciate the public's comments and the right to express yourself in the public. However, using derogatory words
It's not derogatory.
and names of any culture of people, I find it offensive for everyone in the room.
No, it's not offensive, your board member, because
I
why? Because
accept-
it's the truth, and you're sitting right there.
I
You're
accept-
seeing what's going on in IPS, but your jaws are locked. Not one syllable about the genocide that's going on in IPS. You know this. You should not be sitting on that board because you're powerless, being a colored man, to change anything. You know this. You're there for window dressing only, and you can do nothing to help your own people but sit up there and send down derogatory policies to further enslave and imprison them. So you need to step down today.
Back to the comment I was trying to make from an education standpoint. I value the input and feedback from the public regarding policy and education, and embrace that. And I think we all have a right to share those concerns. My statement was simply to say the words that we use and being cognizant of the approach, I think, should be considered as people come to a podium. And I think it's offensive, certain words to the general public, not just a specific race. Thank you.
Thank you. Todd Bass?
Good morning, Madam Superintendent, members of the State Board. Thank you for your service. Todd Best, Executive Director with the Indiana Association of School Principals. Appreciate the comments that we've heard this morning regarding the ASSIST training and that mandated school improvement plan process. As we've discussed with people across the state in our district meetings, at our own State Board of Ed meetings, and as I've been at a state council meeting for Advanced Ed, we too hear the concerns that I think were raised regarding that. Many schools across the state have a process in place that they feel positive about in terms of the results that they get and the process that they can take, the buy-in from their teachers, and the use of the ASSIST platform isn't as acceptable to them. They would prefer to have their own process in place and be able to use that. If we're trying to collect statewide data, obviously we looked at that recently with the Data Reporting Committee and then tried to do some deregulation, so I think that's a little bit of a concern. And I've had people mention that if we are looking to collect data, there's probably other processes that we could put in place or existing data that we could draw upon without having to use one template across the state. I've heard concerns from principals regarding the training and how that's been rolled out and the ability to actually integrate with the system as it currently sits. I think that's still in a little bit of a delay. I know the March 1 deadline seems like a long way away, but in an administrator's seat now through Christmas time really is a very fast-paced role. When they return in January, they're really focused on preparing their students and their staff for the upcoming tests. And really, if you fast forward to, if the March 1 deadline is there, that means a approval by your school board in February, which really means you have January to complete the school improvement process. So we just raised concerns about that. I appreciate the comments from Dr. Freitas regarding the contract, because right now we have principals in training, or we have central office people in training, and then we have principals that will be out of their building in training within their districts once that training is available. All time that's going to be spent, if we don't go forward in some fashion this year, then that's time out of the building and not well spent. And if we have an executed contract and that's a commitment year on, at some point in time, if that contract delays or is not approved again, then we'll have implemented a process that won't be continued. Finally, raised concerns that the ASSIST platform, that as it currently sits, from my state council meeting, it was let known that in 12 to 18 months, that platform would change and be then titled eProve. So that may have some similarities to our current ASSIST platform, but I just worry that we're training on one system, moving to another in a very short period of time. Thank you.
And thank you. And Todd, I do want to say again, I look forward to having the conversation about the concerns at the advisory committee that I'm going to have.
Thank you.
Upcoming.
We're always willing to do that.
Thank you very much.
I have a question for Todd.
You may.
Todd, thanks for your service and working with our schools throughout the state. You're out there every day. And I want to go back to the advanced ed comment I made earlier, plus what you had just said. And as you're working with school principals and central office people, going through professional development, putting information into a new platform, do they have any sense that the contract has not been approved yet?
No, I don't believe so. When we talked about this at our advanced ed meeting, the initial reaction was there wasn't much concern from people in the training. I asked that very question at our IASP board meeting, and their reaction was, well, we really didn't have an awareness that this could not be in place. Really, we were told we were going to do this, so we're doing this, and we were trying to grasp the new system and the requirements. We were just trying to learn what was going on versus having a chance to react.
So central office people, principals are really busy with their schools, serving our students, which we've asked them to do, and we have another layer on top of this. What would be the consequences if this particular contract does not get approved?
Well, we've got a lot of time spent right now, either from a central office or a principal's perspective. Every corporation could send two, so it was up to their decision. Do I send a principal out of the building, or do I devote central office time and then do the train-the-trainer model? So we've got that amount of time. We also had schools ready to submit a school improvement plan in that September timeframe. Now they're thinking they're going to delay till March, integrate I-STEP scores with that. So now they've kind of put on hold some of those things. Principals try to develop a rhythm across the year of this is what happens, call it day one, I make sure the buses run and chairs are in place. And then by September, I need to have this done and so forth. And so now that rhythm, we'll have to get back in sync of how that works.
So would it be fair to say the consequence of the contract not being signed for whatever reason would be devastating to school districts, all the time, all the energy they put into this new system?
I think it's impactful, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to our agenda, we have Best Practices, Innovation and Education. We have Ben Grimes and Keenan Kelly from Catalyst for Quality Grant winners.
And Madam Secretary, or Superintendent, if I could make a comment on this?
Oh, sure.
This was my suggestion to have them here. Kind of enjoy the best practice, if you hadn't noticed, part of this. But a few months ago, when I mentioned this during comments at a meeting, I had the opportunity to one evening go through the process of being one of the judges on the top 10 finalists for the Institute for Quality Education's Catalyst for Quality Finalists, Quality Education Grant. And those were two $2,500 grants for innovative teaching being done in a data-driven environment and really using data to influence teaching and direct teaching. And so I was very, very inspired that evening for those 10 at a time when we talk about people going into teaching, we talk about have we taken creativity away and so forth. I'm a big believer that we have not. We still have some very, very creative folks out there, and you're going to see two of them here in a moment. And so I'm very, very proud to have them here today. And as an administrator and a person that will always be a teacher at heart, because no matter how long I work or how long I live, I probably will have been a teacher for the longest part of my career. And I was reminded how important it is for us as administrators to make sure that we have resources available for our teachers to do creative things. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over.
Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Benjamin Grimes. I am the physics teacher at Roncalli High School on the south side of Indianapolis. I always introduce myself as a double Nobel Prize holder in physics. I think that's appropriate. And the reason I say that is there's me holding 2 Nobel Prizes in physics, neither of which belong to me. They belong to John Bardeen. But I got those at a professional development activity over the summer. And it's part of this professional development activity that led me to want to do more hands-on science in my classroom. What I start every academic year with is a graphical representation that looks like this, and I ask my students, as you look at this graph, can you tell me what's being measured? Can you tell me what's being controlled? Can you tell me what's happening to the radial force as the linear speed changes? And they have no idea what any of these words mean. But that's not the point. The point is, can you look at data and do something with it? And unfortunately, what I've discovered is at the beginning of the year, most of my students cannot do this. They've had algebra, they've had math, they've had all of these classes where they look at graphs, but they haven't done anything with the graphs. And it's not just my classroom. Across the United States, in tests between 2000 and 2012, our students ranked below 50th percentile of the 60 nations that were tested. And back in 2013, you can see there that Indiana STEM issued that initiative that we were going to be the best state in science in the nation. And I firmly believe that we can do that, but we can only do that if we put the equipment in the science classrooms that get students to learn through hands-on and through the way that they're going to do in college. The job demand is also going to increase 10% over the next 3 years for these types of jobs. And it's not being engineers, it's not being scientists, it's being someone that can look at the data, tell you what it means, and tell you what you can do with it. So I'm not trying to push all of these students to become physicists. That's not fair. But for them to be able to look at something like this that's on the ACT, they have to be able to do that. So this is what I do. With some of the equipment that I've purchased, the students are collecting data. This is one of the graphs that they construct on their own. Here they're looking at how the length of a string affects the time it takes it to swing, or adding mass. It's a very simple activity, and they enjoy this. They get to do the science and learn science that way. However, some of the equipment that I ordered is not for such simple tasks. The rotary motion sensor that you see on the left, we spent $169 each for 4 of these, and my department bought the other 4 so that I could have a complete set. And the centripetal force apparatus that you see on the right, obviously at $400 each, I have a hard time going to my department and saying, hey, give me $2,800 because I need 9 of these. They don't want to do that. But because of the grant, I was able to purchase 4, and the department picked up the other 4. So that was a huge blessing in receiving this grant. The first 2 that you saw were from my introductory and AP Physics 1 class. This is for my AP Physics 2 class. Again, we focus on doing the hands-on. Light, probably one of my favorite units, but it's really hard to do hands-on with light. So we ordered a set of mirrors that will allow them to, again, collect data, build graphs, be scientists in the classroom. It's something that I have found my students have enjoyed since I initiated the program, a program I learned from David Hesnes et al. Out at Arizona State University. It's called the Modeling Approach to the Curriculum, and it's been a significant game changer in my classroom. We talk about data-driven instruction. At the beginning of every unit, I collect what the students know, and you can see on the left, how much do they know about acceleration? Now, they don't know much. But at the end, this is the exact same test, and you can see the areas of improvement. Obviously, I'm not going to focus on the first 5 questions when I teach this unit. Most of my students get that. But I'm going to focus on the middle, and you can see the growth in the middle. It's still tough, but it helps me getting the data to know where my students are. So 1, I'm getting the data with the equipment that was provided by the grant, and 2, I'm using the data from the test that they take in order to know how I can become a better teacher. Here's the overall benefit to it, in my opinion. My students that take the ACT, 85% of them get a 21 or better on the science section. A 24 is considered passing. Students that don't take my class, 50%. And this discrepancy grows as the students take physics or as they don't. I brag that the only 36s that have ever happened on the science section have come from my classroom. And I believe it's the data that I get from student performance that helps me get them to that point. Now, granted, they're bright students. They're gifted, they're passionate, but I think the instruction based on this makes a difference. So I thank the Hoosier Quality for Education for providing me for the grant. It's been huge. It's going to be implemented this year, and I'm really excited about it. But again, the results are measurable. In the presentation that you were provided, these are the resources that I cite as far as my statistics. Again, I appreciate your time. I appreciate the opportunity that I've been given with this grant, and I would be happy to entertain any questions that you have right for me now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and enjoy your physics class.
I do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did we have another presenter? We do. Keenan?
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Keenan Kelly. I'm a 5th grade English and Language Arts teacher at the Tinley Preparatory Academy. And so I have the pleasure of serving some great young men. But I want to talk to you first about why I applied for this grant for Reading Counts. This is me back in 5th grade, and it's the grade that I'm teaching right now. I had an amazing teacher in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade who used this program called Reading Counts. And so what they did is they said, Keenan, you're not a great reader. Well, they didn't say that. They were nicer than that. But they said, you know, you don't love to read yet, but they knew I was a competitive kid. So what we did with this program is you get to read a book, take a comprehension quiz, and then see your progress over time. I started off basically as not a great reader in 3rd grade, but by 5th grade I was one of the best readers in my school. So I want to talk to you briefly about the young men. I have the pleasure of serving Tinley Preparatory Academy as an all-boys middle school, 5th through 8th grade. We serve students primarily from the Meadows community in the east side of Indianapolis. Our population is 99% African American, and most of our students do receive free and reduced lunch. The reason I tell you about that is because if we look at national data and state data for students, African American males, they perform about 18 points lower according to the 2013 National Assessment of Educational Progress for reading compared to the top scoring subsection, which is white females. And we see the same issue for some of our students at Tinley Prep. Our students last year started off on average a grade behind in reading, and only 24% of our students were on grade level when they entered. But with Reading Counts, what we're hoping to do is enhance the reading program that we already have in our school. We're hoping for 3 primary goals. The first one is we want to expose our students to a wide variety of texts. We know that when students are exposed to more and different types of texts, they'll likely increase their reading scores significantly. The second thing we want to focus on is adding and enriching their vocabulary. And the third is becoming fluent, strong readers. And so we think Reading Counts will help us do this. This is how we think it's going to get done. The first thing we'll have our students do, and we're beginning to implement the process fully this month, is students will select a book, something that they like to read. So for our boys, a lot of it is related to sports or science or social studies. So they'll pick a book, and then we'll give them independent reading time in our class. We know that that's huge, and then encourage them to read at home as well. After that, they'll take a Reading Counts quiz. If they pass the quiz, they get some points, and they're excited because they passed a quiz. If they don't, then they get to retake a quiz and take it with a different quiz, so it's not the same material. And then finally, what we're most excited about, the ELA teachers in my building, is we're able to pull data from the Reading Counts program and focus on the types of questions that students are getting wrong. So are students struggling with thematic issues? Are they struggling with comparisons and contrasts within a text? And then we're hoping to use that to drive our instruction in our ELA curriculum. I want to talk about two students briefly last year who, given an independent reading intervention of about 15 minutes a day, grew tremendously in my classroom. Isaiah Morris and Josh, both of them started a grade level or 2 behind. Isaiah actually started about a 1st grade level when he came into our building. He grew about 3 grade levels, and I think in large part because at the end of the year he was so excited to read rather than in the beginning of the year where he dreaded it. So why we think this is an innovative way of implementing, and we're beginning the process now, is one of our goals at our school is to get 100% of our parents involved in some way in our school. So we're going to do this in 3 ways. The first way is we're going to have parent volunteers come in and run our testing lab, because teachers already have many things that they're juggling. So by getting parents involved, we know that that's going to be an endorsement of reading and get students involved. Second, we're going to have them organize our library. And third, we're very excited about, we started a family book checkout where families can come in and check out a book and take it home, because we know that when students have books at home, they're more likely to read. A few other things we're excited about, I'll quickly wrap up, is data. We're excited because this will give us a report that students can take home and tell us how many points they earned on Reading Counts, how many books they read, and additionally, we're going to tie it to awards. So the top 3 in any grade will get an award, and we're also going to incentivize students who are growing. So the top 3 students who grew from quarter to quarter in the number of points they earned in Reading Counts. And finally, we're going to send home additional data about Lexile level, fluency level, and our NWEA, which is our nationalized measure. Final thing I want to say, I appreciate your time. We talk about at Tinley Prep, we have the metaphor of the chain, and that each of us is a link in that chain. For our young men, one of the weakest links that we have is reading. So we're super excited about this grant and the opportunity it provides for our students to be engaged and excited readers. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Keenan. I applaud your goals and your work with literacy.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
Appreciate it.
Other comments?
I have a
Eddie?
question. Thank you for the presentation. I wish I would have met you yesterday. I would have invited you to our conference we had here, the Indiana Commission on Social Status of Black Males. Very interested in the literacy aspect. One of the things we were trying to do is share best practices of schools that are doing great things like this, so I definitely want to stay in contact with you.
Absolutely.
One other thing I wanted to ask specifically about this program, are there any other funding opportunities or that you all are pursuing or have pursued related to this initiative?
No, so this is the first year we've pursued this. I saw the opportunity for the grant, and I was thinking of a way that we could get our boys invested, our young men invested in reading. And so I was already implementing independent reading in my classroom, but I thought if we provide incentives for it, it might drive even more students to be engaged. So we're looking to expand. For us, access to books is an issue. I've personally built up a library of over 1,000 books for our students, but getting access to books is one of the biggest struggles that our students face.
Well, like I said, definitely applaud your efforts and your entire school, so I'd love
Thank
to
you.
stay in touch.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Keenan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item is the consent agenda. We have the approval of the SBOE Executive Director, approval of the latchkey waivers, and initiation of rulemaking to define grade 10 for the graduation examination. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of approving the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The consent agenda is approved. Next, we have the resolution for Indiana Teacher of the Year. Is Jean present?
Jean is here. Come on down, Jean.
Come on down, Jean. It's hard for me to see out there. Nice to see you again. Well, yes, we would like you to give you some comments for in a second. Steve, would you like to read the resolution?
I would love to read the resolution. For the benefit of the audience, Jean is a literacy specialist in Haverhill Elementary School and Southwest Allen County Schools. Had the privilege of working with her for 5 years, the last 5 years of my career, and learned a great deal from her. And Mr. Kelly, if you would, you might want to meet with this lady afterwards and exchange ideas, because I know Jean was taking mental notes on what you were saying and how you're doing with your accomplishments. So you two might want to get together and share notes. Jean, this is a resolution from the State Board of Education, Indiana State Board of Education resolution honoring Mrs. Jean Russell. Whereas Mrs. Jean Russell has served with distinction as a literacy specialist at Haverhill Elementary in Southwest Allen County Schools. Whereas Mrs. Jean Russell has served with distinction as an educator for 25 years. Whereas Mrs. Jean Russell has exemplified unyielding commitment and dedication to the students of Southwest Allen County Schools for 21 years. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the board recognizes the distinguished service and tireless efforts that Mrs. Jean Russell has given for the benefit of Indiana students, schools, educators, communities, and families, and be it further resolved that the board congratulates Mrs. Jean Russell as the 2016 Indiana Teacher of the Year and wishes her the best in her future endeavors. Congratulations, Jean.
So much. Thank you. Overwhelming and humbling, but thank you so much. It's a pleasure to represent such amazing people. It was really fun to hear both of your presentations. I'm super excited about science and reading, so it's just nice to be here and know that that's a part of your process. I guess, in my little microcosm of my world, I didn't realize that you got to hear directly from folks in the classrooms and some of the great, amazing things they're doing for boys and girls. So I'm so excited that that's a part of your process and that you, I know, every day are waking up to do what's best for boys and girls like we all are. So thank you a million times. Thank you.
So is there a motion to adopt the resolution honoring Mrs. Jean Russell as the 2016 Indiana Teacher of the Year?
So moved.
Is there a second? Any discussion? Roll call, please.
A resounding yes.
Double resounding yes.
Yes.
List down. Sorry.
Yes.
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 Of course.
Yes.
Thank you again.
Congratulations, Jean. Next, I'll have Sarah go ahead and read the resolution for Dr. Margaret Horniman.
And we'll invite Dr. Horniman to the front.
Please.
In my almost 7 years of service on this State Board of Education, being able to honor Dr. Maggie Horniman today is by far one of the most humbling experiences. And not only as a member of this board, but as a member of the Avon family, staff, on behalf of the parents, and most importantly, on behalf of the students, it is such a privilege to see you recognized in this way. So I'd like to read the resolution. This is the Indiana State Board of Education resolution honoring Dr. Margaret Horniman. Whereas Dr. Margaret Horniman has served with distinction as superintendent of Avon Community School Corporation, whereas Dr. Margaret Horniman has served with distinction as an administrator in the district for 15 years, whereas Dr. Margaret Horniman has served with distinction as an educator for 25 years, whereas Dr. Margaret Horniman has exemplified effective and creative problem solving by leading the district to a balanced budget and a AA+ bond rating, the district's highest in a decade, whereas Dr. Margaret Horniman has exemplified unyielding commitment and dedication to the students and community of Avon Community School Corporation. Now therefore be it resolved that the board recognizes the distinguished service and tireless efforts that Dr. Margaret Horniman has given for the benefit of Indiana students, schools, educators, communities, and families, and be it further resolved that the board congratulates Dr. Margaret Horniman as the 2016 Indiana Superintendent of the Year and wishes her the best in her future endeavors.
Thank you very much. It's certainly a pleasure, Mrs. O'Brien, to hear you read that resolution. As I remember the day we interviewed you and barely let you get to the car before we offered you a job. It certainly has been inspiring. I don't get to come to your board meetings, but I do get to watch them online, and your work is hard. And it's certainly inspiring to be here and see the kinds of presentations from the educators from Roncalli and Tinley, and of course, Mrs. Russell. I imagine this is the fun part of your job. Please know that the fun part of your job is not the only part we see, and we appreciate it. And I speak on behalf of all the public school superintendents in Indiana when I say thank you for your support and your hard work. I am just a stand-in for lots of superintendents. I don't deserve an award for doing my job, but it is a pleasure to shine a spotlight on public education in Indiana, and it's certainly a joy to have this job. Thank you so much for this recognition. I appreciate it.
Is there a motion to adopt the resolution honoring Dr. Margaret Horniman
So moved.
as 2016 Indiana Superintendent of the Year?
Now so moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Congratulations.
Very much.
If I may, I'd just like to make a comment regarding Maggie, and I saw Margaret, and I wondered who we were talking about. I know her as Maggie. She is truly an outstanding superintendent and will represent the state very, very well. And Maggie, congratulations. I'm proud to have worked with you.
Thank you. If the board doesn't mind, I want to take like 10 minutes. I need to have a restroom break. So if we could just take 10 minutes and we'll resume. Our next item will be I-STEP standard cut score setting. Thank you. 10 minutes. So that will be 10:15.
schools do that. One high school? So how many kids are in high school?
Some, yeah, but you know what I mean? As if it's
Like,
picked from
like a
somewhere
couple
else,
thousand?
makes up for the fact that your kid is at
Here's the deal, and I started to say something, and then I thought, no, it's not a question here, but the state instituted using the assistants for
I know he was trying to evoke a reaction. Trying not to go there. I hope all I said was appropriate.
It was all open already. It was not me.
I'm feeling that.
I hope what I said was appropriate. So.
Good, how are you? Yeah, absolutely. Pretty smooth start. We have a new principal this year, like I love my old principal.
Now that you mention it, yeah.
But, what do you guys want?
And we did cut him short, so I'm not sure if he didn't want to talk to them.
Oh, with their respectfully, I mean, it's a yes.
And, you know, we had a superintendent, and not to say that they don't certainly get to make decisions, but not my day-to-day decisions. My principal makes my day-to-day decisions, you know, schedules and
great.
kids and
I
discipline
like Sam,
and
but
everything.
he's very in charge, but very relaxed.
Well, we can do that. I'm gonna make note of that. A best practice.
I've been on both sides of it.
I don't know, all these grants and things that are being made available, even this.
I fell asleep last night. Laying down in the hotel at like 9:30, literally at 2 a.m. I'm still
So finding some key
That we all institute.
embodiments of success, like examples of success.
I would.
No, that's a good idea.
And at least kind of governor with some of that, so like it's just because we can drop them off.
No. I'm glad you brought that up because when we sit down and talk about it, we're so enamored with all.
Certainly you do. And it's easy to write away.
Yeah.
Because it's, if you got burning in there saying,
Oh yeah. No, I don't pay attention. On certain things.
the thing is, he does have some good things to say.
Yeah.
He does. When you talk about left brain, right brain, and how the kids process information, how you deliver information to the boys, as opposed to,
Right.
very interesting. And he studied it for years.
Yeah.
But then you get him and Greg together.
Yeah. When he get into a rant,
When he gets on a rant, it's over.
Yeah. I'm gonna use the restroom real quick. Yeah. You know, they may have, the folks that were sitting right here, they may have contact information. I'm not sure what she signed up at. I'm sure they probably track it. No, no problem. Yeah, yep.
Quarter after, isn't it? Is it quarter after? Yes. We're ready to resume. If I could have board members. We're ready to resume. The next item is ISTEP standard cut score setting. Michelle Walker, would you please present?
And actually, Cynthia Roach and Carla Egan were going to present with me this morning.
All right. Is Cynthia here? Here she comes. Thank you, Cynthia.
So I think Dr. Egan is,
And who else are we waiting on?
Dr. Carla Egan?
Oh, thank you. Is she here?
A moment.
Sure. While we're waiting, I believe that you have PowerPoints regarding the topic, and you also have the TAC report. All right, Michelle.
Thank you, Superintendent Ritz and members of the board. So this is our third and final cut score setting for this fall. You might remember in September, you actually looked at the NCSIC and the ECA CCRA assessments and set cut scores on those. So the last one we have is ISTEP Plus standard setting. And just as a quick reminder, won't go through all of the process that we discussed in September, but just as a quick review, we're at the two ovals on this diagram where we're presenting to you our cut score recommendations and performance level descriptors. And those performance level descriptors describe what students must know and be able to do at each level of performance. And we'll be asking for your approval for those PLDs as well. Extremely important information that we want to share with the field and also that support the cut score recommendations. At this point, Dr. Egan is going to talk a little bit about the process that we used, and Dr. Egan and Cynthia and I are kind of tag teaming this one this morning.
Good morning, and it's a pleasure to be back in Indiana. I was at the standard setting last week, and my role at the standard setting was to observe and evaluate the standard setting. This is, as I said last time, this is a process I'm quite familiar with, having done it multiple times in many states. CTB implemented the process last time. It was the same standard setting procedure that was implemented for the Indiana NCSIC standard setting and the Indiana CCRA. So it's called the bookmark standard setting procedure. The primary material in Bookmark. It's called the Ordered Item Booklet, and that is simply the test ordered in terms of difficulty from the easiest item to the hardest item. There are 3 rounds of discussion. Each of those rounds, the primary focal point were the performance level descriptors. So it was all about bringing panelists back to the content, back to what is important in terms of what students should do. So there was discussion before they even started about those performance level descriptors. And so they talked about what should students be able to do in order to be passed, in order to be Pass Plus. They did this in their small groups. So within each room, there were about 20 panelists. They were broken into 4 tables. Within their small groups, they had discussions about that. In round 2, they came back, they looked at each other's median bookmark placements, or the middle number, and they again discussed, why did you place your bookmark where you did? Let's talk about the content. In round 3, wow.
What you said.
I know, and I try to be so exciting. In round 3, they were able to have a large group discussion about why did you place your bookmark where you did? What is the content that is expected? What knowledge, skills, and abilities should students in Indiana have? As they finished that discussion, CTB and Dr. Walker came around with impact data, so the percent of students in each performance level. And they were able to show what percentage based on their round 2 cuts would be in each performance level. And then again, panelists, they brought it back, and the facilitators were very skilled at this, they brought it back to the PLDs. And they said, okay, here's what's happening, how does this resonate with you, and how does it reflect on the content students should know? So again, they did this. Once they set their final cut scores, and they did this for 2 grades, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7, 8, they convened as a large group and they had an articulation committee where they talked about the system of cut scores. Does the system make sense from grades 3 to 8? Does the system of impact data make sense? Do we see the percent of students who are at pass? Does it make sense as you move from grade to grade? Are there large rises or falls in the data? And so the articulation committee talked about that. During that review process, we had 3 members of the technical advisory committee there to review the process. And our job was to review the process that was being implemented and to evaluate it. It was myself, Dr. Karen Barton, and Dr. Ed Raber. So we were there to observe, which we did. We also observed the articulation process, and then at the end, we were there to talk with IDOE about the process, about the system of cut scores as we saw it, and to make any recommendations for adjustment. We were able to confirm the quality of the standard setting process itself, and we provided that feedback, and you, of course, got the memo that I got to write over the weekend that discusses our feedback on the process. Do you have any questions about that?
One question I have, and this is really not specific to the process you use, but in general, in the bookmarking process, I'm just curious from your perspective, the rationale, the justification for once you establish the bookmarks in which teachers, practitioners believe students should be able to do, and then the adjustments based on impact data. And could you just quickly elaborate on the justification for that? Because it's adjusted based on that impact data, correct? Either up or down. Or at least they have a chance to review the bookmark or the cut score relative to the impact data and make other decisions. So what is a justification for an up or down adjustment based on that?
So this happens in 3 different areas. The first 2, when the teachers see the impact data, they're directed back to their content. And so when they're shown impact data, they're told this should resonate with you in some way. So what happens sometimes is they'll see way more students passing content than they had expected, which means they should be able to ramp up their expectations. When that happens, they go back to the content and they really explore, what does it mean for a student to be pass in Indiana? So in round 3, it really comes back to the content. When the articulation committee met, where they looked at the system of cut scores and the system of impact data, and they asked, does this make sense? And they were adjusting really, as you said, on impact data so that it was well articulated. Even in that case, the table leaders went back to the content. And so with their groups, they had discussions about how much can we move so that we have a well-articulated system of cut scores. Does it make sense to make these adjustments based on what they said, based on content? And the group gave them recommendations on here's how far we think you can move bookmarks, and still it would make sense in terms of content. Now, when the technical advisory committee came together, we of course had been in every room. We had listened to the content-based discussions. We had sat in on the articulation committee, but our job wasn't necessarily to come back to content. It was really to look at the system of cuts and the conversations that we heard and say, does that make sense? Because what we don't want to see happen is, this will be an extreme example, would be third grade having 60% pass, fourth grade having 60% pass, and then fifth grade having 30% pass. Then sixth grade having 50% pass. That type of, sometimes people can make sense of something, but on the surface, as you look at the system, it doesn't make sense. Does that answer your question?
It does. What doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and I understand the process, but it doesn't make sense that those are calibrated based on scores, not necessarily based on the content. Because we come to an agreement around the content and the standards and how students should perform relative to those standards. And then once we have impact data, we adjust the cut scores to get to the numbers that we believe are appropriate. Is that accurate?
Oh, yes, Gary. So I had the opportunity to go, and I think that was one of my questions going in, is if I look at the score and say the score's too low or too high, and then I make adjustments based on that, am I really using the content to drive my decision-making? And the teachers were reminded repeatedly, you need to make the decisions based on content. It's still hard to separate that. We're all human. But I think when you see a score and it's either shockingly low or shockingly high, which there were a variety of, then you look at where your bookmark is. And if I put it on, I'm just giving a random example, page 75, but a partner at my table put it on page 100, we then can have that discussion of why. What standards are you willing to say are not absolutely necessary? Or I'm not willing to budge. I'm willing to budge, but I'm only willing to budge to this page. I can understand these standards. And so the looking at the impact data, when you hear the discussion in the room, people were people get emotional about it because they're looking at a score and saying it's too low or it's too high and trying to separate themselves. But really the conversation was about the content and what do we expect our kids to know and what are we willing to say as a passing score. And so that was one of my questions going in, and it was interesting to watch the conversations happening in the room, really trying to separate themselves from the data, but the data brings about the conversation.
I think that's a fair characterization. The data brings back the conversation, but with the teachers, with the table leaders, it always came back to the content. You ask a very fair question that comes up a lot in the standard setting literature and the standard.
Yeah, because we arrive at a compromise after we see how students are affected. Not based on, here's the standard and here's where we believe we should be. It's just, once we have some contradiction, then we find a compromise that allows us to arrive at a number. And that's my point, is that I agree it's about content, but a lot of those discussions happen throughout the process where it's being calibrated. Then once you apply it to impact data, then there's another discussion, like our students are going to do very well if we set it here. So we need to come to some compromise in where we adjust it. So that's helpful. I was just curious from your perspective how the rationale around that process. So thank you.
It really comes to openness and transparency. allowing people to understand how their recommendations affect students in the world they work in.
Thank you.
Well, review using content and data. Quite honestly, most of this has already been addressed. Carla did, and Dr. Egan did an excellent job referencing the fact that they kept coming back to the performance level descriptors. I was out there the entire week, sitting in the different rooms, and the teachers on these very difficult decisions kept coming back to the performance level descriptors. The ordered item booklet, quite honestly, put the scale score next to each of the items so that they were able to reference, okay, a shift in one item, this is what it does, not by percent of students, but by scale score. I just want to make sure I make that clear distinction. Going into this, the ordered item booklet, they knew that the items were ordered by difficulty, but they did not know the percent of students who had failed based on, you said it here, you said it there, and so forth. So, again, they kept coming, I was impressed with how they kept coming back to the performance level descriptors and reviewing the actual items around the cut and what skills, knowledge, stuff the students should know and be able to do were included therein. The TAC, the Testing Advisory Committee, they reviewed the process, but they also expressed, they explained to the educators how their input would be at the very end. After the teachers did their individual rooms, after the educators, the table leaders came back to do the articulation, then the TAC members came back to look at, not at content as Dr. Egan explained, but more from the policy side, and to discuss, does this make sense for your policymakers? And what adjustments, further adjustments might still be needed or could be discussed.
So these are the recommendations that came out of the final step of this multi-stage process. So, as we've alluded to, this was a multi-stage process where teachers came together to make content recommendations, the table leaders came together to discuss the articulation of those cut scores and impact data, and then the TAC members came together to talk about the system of cut scores and impact data. The first thing we look at is probably the less exciting part for everyone, but it's the scale scores. Indiana is on a vertical scale. You report on a vertical scale. That means that the scale scores themselves should make sense as you move from grade to grade. So what we are particularly concerned about is that you wouldn't have a scale score in a lower grade higher, or a cut score in a lower grade higher than an upper grade. So you don't want to see the grade 5 cut score higher than the grade 6 cut score. And as we looked at these, I mean, for us, these look very nice because you have a nice progression of cut scores. And all the way through, you really had this nice progression of cut scores as you moved up from grade to grade. And Michelle is going to talk about the information people really want to know.
So I'm going to introduce this, and Cynthia's going to give you some information that gives feedback around the last 2 or 3 times we've actually done this process that I think will be helpful to give you more context. So the impact data, and actually Dr. Bertram, you had asked about what does that look like? And one of the things we really tried to over and over again remind the participants of is that the DOE really wasn't chasing a particular number or percent. And that was important for them to know that the board wasn't looking for a particular number, the department wasn't looking for a particular number, but it definitely needed to be based on what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that students must have to demonstrate proficiency in either the pass or pass plus categories. And so as Dr. Egan mentioned, I think folks are always interested in knowing, so what does that look like? And so this information is to give you feedback on if we were to score the test today, this is what % of students would land in each of the performance categories based on the recommended cuts. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia. She's going to give you some context around other years that we've done this process and kind of what the lines have looked like.
Sarah.
Michelle, it's a question for you. And I'm going to go back to the same talking point that I have brought up since spring when this test was administered. And at that point, I articulated from my own experience and from the experience of those in the field that were reaching out to me that there were some absolute concerns on the usage of the online format compared to the paper pencil format. So at that point, I believe it was back in July when I had asked for that data, and I was told that would be worked within the validity studies and that we would be able to have conversations looking at the final format for the cut scores. My concern being that we might need to look at the potential for two separate cut scores given the difficulty between the two different tests. At this point, I still haven't seen any documentation from the department that justifies one cut score in this area. So I'm looking for a little bit of feedback from your team in terms of have we looked at the study between, the comparability study between paper pencil and online, and how do I justify to the field and the people who have very strongly voiced their concern in this area before we even move further looking at kind of historical data within the cut scores?
Sure. So one of the things that, and I think I've talked with the board about this before, but anytime we administer an assessment in more than one mode, we do the comparability study that you're speaking about, making sure that can the scoring tables, are the equating mechanisms really the same for each of the two modes? And so just like we do with every other assessment that has different modes, we did that with this one as well. And so at this point, we have a draft report that we actually are discussing with CTB. It's something that Dr. Egan wanted to look at before she presented today, so we did share it with her as well. So one of the things that we are looking toward is using one set of cut scores, but we look at the equating between the two forms. And Dr. Dong-Yin Kim is our psychometrician from CTB, and I think he might have done this actually, Mrs. Wicker, while you were there. But he did go from room to room at the cut score setting and explain to the participants how that actually works, because there was a lot of interest in knowing, so paper seemed easier, or is it really easier? And it's interesting because one of the things that Dong-Yin Kim noted is that in some instances, paper is easier on an item, but in some instances, online is easier. And so one of the things that we determine is what across the board would be the equating for both forms, so that one is not deemed easier than the other when we actually do the final scoring. So certainly we could share that information with you as well. That's something that, again, we do on a regular basis, because we want to make sure that when we do our final scoring that they are comparable, and that's something that we have to defend to U.S. Department of Ed. So it's very much on our minds as well.
So at this point, you feel 100% confident that it is an equitable testing experience between the
It is, and one of the things that certainly we welcome feedback from other psychometricians is, about the methodology utilized, because we do want to make sure it's defensible. And CTB did use a defensible method, but we're certainly always welcome for feedback from our TAC if they have feedback for us.
May we call, since, I think it would be helpful to have that information, because, and I am not a psychometrician. I am not an expert in testing in any way. However, as a practitioner, I know the experience that my students go through if they complete a more difficult assessment, simply the psychology of it and that impact on the student. And those are the kinds of answers that I personally need to have fully verified before I can move forward with a vote for one cut score, because the data that I've seen, the memo that I'm reading, right now I don't have that level of confidence, and that's where I struggle at this point. So I don't know if you're comfortable as well, but I feel we need more information in this area.
Carla?
Thank you. So I think you're talking about Dr. Kim's memo on the mode comparability study. So in the memo, Dr. Kim addressed all the areas, ELA, math, science, and social studies. And I'm just going to concentrate on ELA and math. So for those two areas, this isn't a true mode comparability. So with a mode comparability study, what we're assuming is I can administer a test in paper and pencil and online, and it doesn't matter, that the mode doesn't matter how I administer that. So I can apply the same sets of statistics to both modes, or we call them parameters. So when I slip up, you know what I'm talking about. So when you apply these parameters, it doesn't matter that a child took it in paper and pencil. It doesn't matter that a child took it online. It was the same test. What the memo says is that that was not the assumption from the beginning with these tests, that CTB calibrated these tests so they each have their own sets of parameters. And so it's much like having a form, you had different forms of the test every year. And every year, those forms were equated, so we knew, so CTB, so Indiana knew you could compare a student's score in 2013 to 2014. And they treated this test in much the same way. So they had the parameters for the online test and the parameters for the paper and pencil test, and they equated those. And so that equating should take into the account the difficulty that you talked about, and this came up in every room at the standard setting, that it should take into account that difficulty of the paper and pencil versus the online test. And so when I looked at that memo, what I was particularly interested in were really those test characteristic curves that were the appendix. And so for the ELA test, they were very close to each other, which is what we want to see. That says there's really no difference between the forms. It didn't matter how they were administered. But for math, there were some, it did look like some of those paper and pencil forms may have been a little bit easier. And the question becomes, is that difference too great? And the test curves were still fairly close, so that the equating should be able to account for that. Now, I can look at that from my perspective. At the same time, you do have other TAC members who are doing an independent validity study of this. And I know they haven't had enough time to digest the information, so I can't answer for them.
In your professional opinion, are we ready to vote on these cut scores today? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but this is a huge deal, and I apologize, but we've got to get this right.
Great question, though.
Honestly, from my professional opinion, and I'm really glad I was able to listen to the teachers, because for me, this comes back to what's best for teachers and what's best for students in Indiana. And I would want the validity study done first.
For the record, I agree.
I do think everything's okay, but I would want the validity study done so you have that confidence as you move forward in using a single set of cut scores. I think it's where it will lead you, but you don't want to have a whole other group come back and say it's not okay.
So what would be your recommendations moving forward?
My recommendation would be to have the team, Dr. Raber and Dr. Briggs, who are doing the validity study, be able to spend more time reviewing the memos, be able to interact with Dr. Kim to ask their questions so that they can come to an agreement on what all of the data means. And I would bring in, I guess the other part of that I would have is just if Indiana had a standing TAC who could review this information as it becomes available. So if you have a TAC meeting in August, the vendor knows we're preparing these memos so the TAC can review it and the TAC can ask the questions before we get to standard setting. I guess that would be my two-part review.
Michelle? Did you want to comment?
Sure. I mean, I think, always having more information is helpful. I think one of the purposes of the review that Carla and Dr. Raber and Dr. Barton did last week was really about the validity of the cut score process. So I think we're kind of talking about two different things today, and that makes it a little bit challenging, I think, Superintendent Ritz. I think what we're presenting today is the cuts based on the validity of the process last week. I think the assignment of the actual scores is a different question. So I would recommend maybe that we take those as two separate things.
Can I ask a question first of Carla? So Carla, so that I understand this, so does the comparability report have bearing on the validity of the process that we went through for cut score setting? Because I just need to understand the whole picture.
Sure. So before standard setting, we want to be sure the test scale we're working with is solid. And in this case, we want to understand that we want to be sure that we have comparable scores on the paper and pencil and online test. And that question is being addressed in the validity report by Dr. Briggs and Dr. Raber. But ideally, we would have that resolved before we do standard setting. Now, the process itself, from my perspective, was a solid process. The teachers were excellent. You should congratulate yourselves on the quality of the teachers. But we do want to be sure that the scale itself can be supported.
So as a board, we've been dealing with this issue, both the topics, and Sarah's right, we've been working with the two issues side by side. So now the suggestion is that we should complete the validity study. So I'm going to ask you both, perhaps, how close is that to being completed so that we can move on with our work?
That might best be answered by Cynthia, because I think she's the direct link to Dr. Raber and Dr. Briggs, so.
Cynthia?
Since the documents necessary to do the validity study, only some of them were sent last night, we still haven't received everything, I can't even quite answer that. So we need all documentation first to be able to do the comparability study. I know they are definitely still missing at least one piece. But the other two, we only received last night, and even one of them was dated October 2nd. Why it wasn't sent to them, I don't know. But they only received it last night when I sent it to them.
Well, I understand everything's still in draft form. There's no final pieces to be sent. So with that, because we've been wrestling with the validity and the cut score setting process for quite some time. So I guess there was a decision made to do the side-by-side work and continue the validity study. We worked with all kinds of entities to be sure that we came up with a timeline for doing our work.
But the comparability study needed to be completed before they were able to do standard setting. Therefore, we should have had something in final enough form, even if there was a typo here or there, final enough form for the validity study from our side to be completed.
Sarah?
Just in response to the comment that these are two separate issues, because they absolutely are, but I'd like to be clear that when this first came up and we were presented the timeline back in July, I directly asked the question, not only, on the timeline it was worded that we would have the study done, and I directly asked at that point, are we assured that we will have the results of that study back before we get to cut score setting? Because based on all of the feedback from the field, there was that concern that we potentially might need to look at it in a different way. And I was assured by the department at that time that we would have that information prior. So I understand there have been different hurdles along the way, but I think it's been this board's assumption from the beginning that we would have all of that information in order to make a qualified decision today looking at cut scores. So I do think the issue is linked.
Michelle?
I think they're connected. I think they are separate, but maybe tangentially connected. I think the question about comparability is something that we did have CTB do prior to the cut score setting. If they were concerned about that, we would have had to delay again. I think maybe your question is about whether or not the board actually had the report, so maybe I'm not understanding the question exactly.
In all fairness, CTB we hired experts because we wanted to make sure that we had kind of a non-biased side as well.
Third-party review.
Looking solely at the CTB report is looking at a McDonald's report saying that they have the best hamburger in the world. I mean, at some level, they still have some skin in the game. Not to downplay any validity of theirs, but I think that in order for us to justify such a huge decision to the field, we need to be able to say that we have this unbiased information stating that we are on track. And I don't feel we have that at this point.
So let me ask a question. So the comparability study, Cynthia, is that all that's needed to do cut scores? Or are you talking about the entire validity study being completed
Okay.
before cut scores? I just need a clarification as to what we need, what the board's wanting to have completed, perhaps, before we actually approve cut scores, because we have a very short timeline.
We need comparability study completed first. The other pieces, not necessarily, but the comparability study must be completed first.
So the only piece we're waiting on then is the comparability study from the board to weigh in on what that looks like.
I'm going to couch that a little bit. They have several pieces to their study that they are looking at, including alignment and so forth. and until I read through all of them again, but I did know going into all of this, we had to have the comparability study completed. And several documents, of course, have been sent for their review, but none regarding this. And even with what was sent, we're still missing at least one piece for them to do that.
I guess a question as well.
Yeah, Vince.
Sequentially, in an ideal situation, what would this look like? We have a process, we've set cut scores, or at least recommended cut scores, we have the comparability study. Sequentially, how should that have been done?
Well, the comparability study should have come out before we ever went into standard setting.
So there
We
should have been a
had that.
comparability study
Should have had that.
that would have informed the standard setting process, which then informs and we arrive at the cut scores. So what we have now is a standard setting process that has taken place. Cut scores have been recommended without the first part that would have informed the whole process.
Correct.
Well,
So-
not
Well,
quite
it's the-
true.
It's the creation of the
So,
scale.
so Cynthia, I just want to back up a little bit. So we've been working together this entire time and started the process, invited all these hundreds of educators in here, knowing that we were doing a separate comparability study in addition to the CTB. This is the first time, actually, that I've heard that the comparability study should have been, that the board requested, should have been done prior to doing our cut score setting process.
Superintendent, I directly asked that in a previous meeting, and I was assured by the department that that would be in place prior to cut score setting.
And
I think, yeah.
go ahead, and
Oh,
we
I'm sorry.
did.
I think part of the challenge is that CTB actually did conduct the
Right.
the study. It's in draft form because they don't finalize anything until the tech report comes out. So I think some of it a little bit is semantics, I think, and just trying to maybe wrap our heads around. So they do that study so that we can go into the cut score setting with confidence. I think the validity study team of Dr. Raber and Dr. Briggs, I think, has some questions maybe about the information in the study. That's maybe what I'm gathering here. That's if that makes sense or not, but I mean, so it was done before. We wouldn't have done the cut score setting if we thought there was concern. But I think then the third party validates that. I think that's where we are, maybe, is having them give feedback.
So the third-party validation of the comparability study is the piece that the State Board of Ed staff is now requesting to have prior to cut score setting that we already participated in.
It was requested not just prior to cut score setting. We've sent the list of requested documents months ago, and they only started receiving things as early as September 30th, and even on the September 30th, when a whole bunch of data was posted, none of this was posted. And again, this memo was dated October 2nd, and granted, I understand it's only in draft form, but since we were going into standard setting, it would have been our Dr. Raber and Dr. Briggs really should have been given that opportunity to review and ask questions before ever standard setting occurred, and they were not given that opportunity, even if it was only a draft form.
Michelle?
So I think part of the challenge for CTB was obviously that we're also in the timeline of the rescore and getting data back for A to F grades and things of that nature. So one of the things that they did express concern is about turning around some of the documents in a timely manner. So that's something we actually did talk with board staff about, talked with Dr. Raber and Briggs about there would be a delay in getting some information to them because we were focused on doing some of the other work that needed to be expedited. So I think, to Cynthia's point, that the draft came to us on the 2nd so that we could discuss it with CTV last week, which we did do. Again, I think if we want to get feedback from Dr. Briggs and Dr. Raber, I think that's fine. I think that's like a third-party secondary piece in the process.
So what would be the recommended timeline to get this complete?
I don't know if we need to just do a conference call with them today and get their
Because-
feedback.
Because it's still not a final form, I guess, but if you need to, if we need to talk about it and get it completed, we need to get it done. Sarah?
Do we have any early indication from Dr. Briggs and Dr. Raber?
Yeah, I don't know.
Do we have any early indication from them on their thoughts on comparability of the two different formats?
Yeah, they both have raised big questions, and including one where Dr. Briggs is questioning part of the methodology used, and everybody's sort of hoping, quote unquote, hoping that it's a typo, but if it's not, it raises into very real question the process used. So they have questions, they have concerns, and they've made it clear that they need more information.
A question, please.
Yeah, Vince?
Is there anything in that comparability study that could compromise this process? Yeah, once that's completed in that process, is there anything that could come from that that could compromise this process?
And so what you're specifically asking about is the evaluation by Dr. Briggs and Dr. Raber.
Yeah, in the comparability study that hasn't been completed or finalized.
Right.
Is there anything moving forward as that's completed that could compromise this process or that would call into question the validity of this process?
What could happen, the worst-case scenario would be if Dr. Briggs and Dr. Raber found that they could not support the way CTB did the calibration and equating their process for finding parameters. If they were to find that and they were to call that into question, then that would undermine how the scale was created, and that, of course, is the basis for the standard setting process.
So it seemed to me it would be impossible for us to approve this process and cut scores until we know exactly the outcome of the comparability study.
That would be my recommendation, to wait for it.
I agree with that.
Yeah, you stated that earlier, so I think we all kind of got that. I just want to know, what's the process going forward? Does it involve a long process? Does it involve a conference call? What is it involved in order for us to get our work completed? Oh, and BJ, sorry.
That was actually my question.
Oh, that was your question, okay.
I think that's going to depend. I mean, we've got Dr. Briggs and Dr. Raber who just received this information late last night. So they're processing the information and have questions, and there's likely going to be a conference call to clarify between CTB and Dr. Raber and Dr. Briggs on what exactly that report is saying. So I don't know that you can have immediate next steps in this moment, considering they just received this information last night and are still continuing to digest exactly what it says. And they have questions that could only be answered by CTB, which is going to require a follow-up phone call. So Superintendent, I understand your question, and I think the answer is we're not sure yet. We have to give time for them to process the information and digest. You guys are coming together again on October 28th for a special meeting. Perhaps the issue can be addressed in that meeting. It's going to depend on...
Well, and that's kind of where I was headed, because we're meeting here again soon,
Yes.
so that we could go ahead and stay within our timeline parameters of what we need to do here for the calculations of the grades and moving forward. So it sounds like we need to get together the meeting of the minds and go through that. Is it the desire of the board to hear the rest of the presentation or to delay?
Delay.
Delay. Okay. Thank you very much. So we will, Michelle, I know that you will be diligent in making sure that CTB is available, and if need be, I'll be on the call and make sure that that happens. So we will adjust what we need to be doing and bring the cut scores back to us. Thank you very much. Oh, yes, Gordon? Go
I
ahead.
just want to reiterate the points I made earlier in the meeting, that I feel like this is another self-inflicted wound, and it's unfortunate that we have to delay on this. And that really only causes not only confusion in that room among the department and board members, but more importantly, among the public. What's the public to think of all of this? And in my view, this was very avoidable. We could have voted on the cut scores today if the information had been delivered when it should have. So I just want to reiterate my concern about the process and how it's been handled and managed. And I think ultimately that reflects poorly on all of us, because members of the public are sitting out there wondering what the heck is going on. And I would also add that teachers out there who are depending on all of these scores to be processed efficiently are depending on all of this for purposes of their raises. And that is a great concern of mine. The teachers out there who deserve the raises that they should be getting sooner rather than later, as soon as possible. But we're having unnecessary, in my view, delays that just really add concern out there, and that's just really disappointing. So I just wanted to make sure I conveyed where I was on that. Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the approval of charter advanced distribution formula. I think we have two speakers. First will be Ann Murphy-Klein. Oh, wait a minute, she wanted to speak on the grant. Sorry about that. It might be the very same topic. John O'Neill for the approval of charter advanced distribution formula.
Thank you, Superintendent Ritz and board members. I've spoken on this issue before, and I won't go back over a lot of the information I've already presented, but I did want to raise a couple of concerns we have about this loan program. I guess first I would say that just because the legislature has charged you with the role of divvying out this money doesn't mean that it all has to be given out. Our concern is that whether there's a cap or not, simply looking at some of the data that I see in this loan proposal, 7 of the 12 charters applying for loans received a D or F. And one particular school is asking for $25,000 for a sign. They're asking for $100,000 for reserves. We were thinking, wouldn't it be great if all of our community public schools could request reserves? While many of them are underwater and struggling to pay the bills, and again, the salary issue has been a major concern. And then another charter, Carpe Diem, is asking for $45,000 per pupil in one of their schools. And I just think that we have to take a step back and look at whether that's really the best judgment by the legislature, and your role in dividing this money is, the situation is whether we should be giving that much money to schools who have D and F grades, or that are brand new charters and don't have grades yet at all. And I think that's a significant amount of money. It questions whether or not tax dollars are going to the best use in a time that we now have 3 systems funded by public tax dollars. And then, of course, and I mentioned this last time this issue arose at the state board, but $91 million was forgiven several years ago in the budget. And are we going to come back in a few years and have the same situation arise? And I think that the responsible thing to do would be to base any loan amounts, whether it's capped per pupil or however that formula is decided on, but capped in a way that we could ensure that the charters who receive that loan are able to pay it back realistically, and don't come back in 5-6 years and say, oh, we need more time, we can't do it. And so those are just some concerns I have with looking through the formula of what's provided, and just the sheer amount in some situations that the schools are asking per pupil compared to what the funding formula has been in other cases. So, thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the charter advanced distribution formula?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the grant distribution formula. We have one speaker, Ann Murphy-Klein. Actually, you have two, and then that will be followed by Barbara Burke Fondreau.
Thank you. My name is Ann Murphy-Klein. I'm the president of the board and a parent of two children at New Community School, which is a charter school in Lafayette, Indiana. I understand that the parameters of the decision that you're making on the recommendations today are really set by statute and rule, and I'm not really here to try to convince you to change what those recommendations are. I understand that your lawyer has given great thought to trying to apply them flexibly, and I appreciate that approach to it. I'm here because I want you to better understand how those statutes and rules affect schools and communities and families like ours. And I want you to know our story so that you can help to make those statutes and rules and policies better in the future. New Community School is one of the original charter schools that opened in 2002, and we are one of the very few that remain from that cohort. And it's because of structural impediments that we have faced through that 10 years as a charter school. Some of those include inequitable funding and lack of facilities funding, and I see those things happening now, and that is wonderful. We are glad to see that you are taking action to improve that inequality between school fundings. However, if those continue to be based on the A to F grade system, you're intentionally destroying schools that don't deserve it. And this is why. New Community School, for example, is not a failing school. We are a small and progressive school, and both of those characteristics count against us in a single test accountability system. Being small, we currently have 212 students in K through 8. That means we have about 100 students who are in our testing cohort in grades 3 through 8. That means that every student we test has an inordinate impact on the result of that statistical formula that gets applied to us. For the 2013-14 school year, 3 students who had had a difference of a couple percentage points in their performance on that test would have made us a C. If we had received a C, we would be receiving an additional $75,000 today from this grant that would allow us to pay for 2 classrooms. Those 2 classrooms will be closed tonight at a family meeting at our school. All right. If our grade were calculated by elementary and middle school separately, we would also have received a C in our elementary program, and we would be able to qualify automatically for this grant funding. Because our grade is calculated K to 8, and that's not comparable to other schools, and because middle school is a performance issue, it's a performance issue statewide. If you look at school performance across the board, middle schools don't perform as well. That has hurt us. We're not going to close our middle school because they don't test well. We're going to make it better, and we're working really hard to do that. But we are also a progressive school. We're not a failing school, but we're not a quick fix, fast acting, get those test scores up kind of school. We believe in investing time in children's emotional and social commitment to being a learner. We believe that we need to build relationships, not just skills. We're like the slow food movement in education, right? We know it takes time for those kids to come around. And when we bring in kids who are burnt out and turned off by traditional classrooms, our first response to them is not to assess them and drill them to get them ready for the next round of testing. Our first response to them is to get to know them and to get to know their families and to rebuild their identity as a learner. That works, but it takes time. Our pass rate of students who have been at our school for 3 years or more is 87% in ELA. That's pretty good. We're not a failing school. We have 25% students in our school enrolled in special ed. They have been told in their lives that being different means failure. In our school, they're not different and they don't fail. They pass at 8% higher than the state average passing rate for special education. We are not failing those students. We are serving them. New Community School was consistently an A school up until 3 years ago. What happened to us was a direct result of not having facilities funding. In order to grow our school, we ended up in 3 separate buildings. And in order to finance our school, we had to do a whole bunch of gymnastics and begging and pleading with a construction company, and we finally got them to renovate an abandoned grocery store so that we could have a beautiful new facility. It's gorgeous. We love it. But making that change and having our sole focus on getting into that building and increasing our student count to be able to pay for that on our own out of our pupil funding meant that we had a huge loss of school culture. Oh, can I say one more thing? And that school culture loss affected our test scores, and we are still reeling from that hit. We need your support to be a truly different school. And as long as you base that support on a one-size-fits-all accountability system, you will be intentionally destroying the schools that are trying to provide for families who want to see a different experience for their children. We're not in competition with our local schools. We have outstanding local schools. And the fact that you're basing it on comparison to them is hard for me because I don't want to be compared to them. I want to be something completely different.
Thank you. Next we have Barbara Burke Fondu. My apologies if I mispronounced your last name.
You're perfect. No,
Okay.
thank you. Indiana Code, Section 2024-2-1, Purposes of Charter Schools. A charter school may be established under the article to provide innovative and autonomous programs that do the following: serve differentiated learning styles and needs of public students, offer public school students appropriate innovative choices, provide varied opportunities for professional educators, allow public schools freedom and flexibility in exchange for exceptional levels of accountability, provide parents, students, community members, and local entities with an expanded opportunity of involvement in the public school system. Madam Chair and school board members, state board members. My name is Barbara Burke Fondren, and I am the founder and school leader for Community Montessori Charter Public School in New Albany, Indiana. Our school began in 1998 and converted in 2002 to a charter school. Our school serves about 600 children and teens ages 5 through high school graduation. About 30% of our population is eligible for free and reduced lunch, and about 20% of our population is identified as special education. I stood at the State House from 1996 to 2001 every year testifying for the charter school law with Teresa Lubbers. Never was there a conversation about charter schools having better I-STEP test results than traditional public schools. As I shared a moment ago from the state law purpose of charter schools, I agree to exceptional levels of accountability. But the context of that accountability was with our authorizer. I worked with our authorizer during the first years of our charter to set qualitative and quantitative goals based on the uniqueness of our school and the innovative option we created for our community. That is authentic accountability. The Indiana State Board of Education was handed a criteria from our legislator for determining these grant-like guidelines. The individuals that crafted these conditions were short-sighted in the uniqueness of our school, like New Community, and the philosophy of our program to create leaders and critical thinkers, not passive test takers. We know how to improve test scores. We choose not to because we look at the longer range need of people in our community and in our facilities and in our businesses. They also didn't anticipate K-12 programs that have the luxury of utilizing the development of individual learners by not teaching them a skill that they are not ready for and would benefit in the long run from differentiated instruction. They could still show success in the long run, but not when compared to our local elementary, middle school distribution. For example, if we adjust the grade level from K-5 instead of K-4 and 6th to 8th grade instead of 5th through 8th, our A to F score was not only successful at the high school level, but would also have been successful at the elementary and middle school level, bringing in nearly $250,000 in additional funding to our school for revenue. The current proposal our school represented to you in our application is about $80,000 because it only includes the high school portion. Of course, we realize that the Indiana State Board of Education does not have the resources to verify the grade level distributions outside of our separate high school score, but we do think it is important to point out that indiscrepancy. The Indiana State Board of Education understands the flaws in our A to F accountability plan and has worked diligently with committees, school leaders, educators, and other community members to forge a new plan that would create more equity in assessment. This new plan by design will give more B's and C's than the current plan with the exact same assessment. Our school was 3 children short of passing one test from changing our current A to F score from a D to a C. We appealed these 3 children to the state as seen in our application, and with that decision, our school has seen to be ineligible for $250,000 worth of additional funding. This is a horrendous financial blow to our innovative educational program and to our community. I believe that the Indiana State Board of Education has the power to find our school eligible for the entire grant because of the flaws stated above and legislative criteria that did not take into account K-12 programs in general. We put together a strong rationale in our application to support this change for full eligibility. Our families signed a petition on support of this as well. With 96% of our families returning this school year and over 125 families on the wait list, we are a proven successful school. Please consider our school in receiving the entire funding of nearly $250,000 instead of the high school portion only of $80,000. Thank you.
Thank you.
Question, I'm sorry.
Yes, Eddie?
What's your school again? I'm sorry.
Community Montessori.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So our last motion, I just want to make sure I had my wording right because these motions are so similar. So the last motion we took was the approval of the charter advanced distribution formula. Now we're going to take a vote on the motion to approve the charter grant distributions as recommended by the State Board of Education. Is there a motion? Oh, yes.
2 quick modifications that need to be made to the memo. Items number 7 and 11, schools listed 7 and 11 were listed as policy decisions. When we submitted the board materials, I was still vetting those to make sure that the methodology was aligned with what we were applying to other charter schools. Those are now our official recommendations. So for school number 7, which is Math and Science South, that would be grade 7. And then for new community, it would be grades 5 and 6. And those are already listed in the specific recommendations attached to the memo. I just wanted to clarify that.
Oh, okay.
I have a question for
Yes,
the
Eddie.
staff. The schools that applied that were denied, and I know that we're statutorily, we have to approve, provide the funds. What was the feedback that we provided, or how we provided the feedback to the schools that were denied? Just a thought.
So the feedback was, for these schools, was actually very individualized. Staff tried to make ourselves available on a personal level to these schools to try to answer questions, to try to address concerns. Both of the speakers that just spoke, I've emailed and spoken to personally, explaining the methodology that's been used. So we've really tried to approach this with a customer service approach, so that each school understands this is the statute, this is the law, this is the way it has to apply, and this is the methodology we're using. So.
And part of that's based on the grades of the schools.
Yeah.
So, last part of it, if we've identified that based off the grade, is there anything within the eligibility of the funding to say, can we be flexible in terms of helping them to I guess, improve that status? Whatever we've identified as that gap, is there anything on the back end that we can do to say, hey, you weren't eligible for what you asked for, however, there are some dollars to assist you to improve?
Not in terms of this grant.
Question. So have
Yes.
we identified any kind of flaws in this grant process that we need to have corrected or attempt to be corrected?
For the next,
As you go through this process, have you identified any areas in which we could improve this grant process to eliminate some of the concerns that have been addressed?
I think there are probably some, and that's a discussion we can have when the time comes. At this point in time, you know, my goal was to interpret the language and the intent of the statute, and to apply sort of an individual, to the best of my ability, service to these schools. But you're right. I mean, there's always going to be an opportunity to maybe recommend improvements in the way these are, you know, the way the statutory language is worded. Sure, but am I understanding your question?
Yeah, I'm just curious as how we've been informed through this process, that we could also inform other policymakers in the General Assembly, whatever, if there are statutory changes that need to be made to correct any kind of concerns we may have, having now gone through this process.
Sure, and I think that is a conversation we need to have.
Great.
And one example is there were some schools that had grades, so that the statute reads that they're compared to the nearest schools with the same grade configurations. Well, some of these charter schools there are no traditional public schools that have the same grade configurations. So what we had to do was, in accordance with the intent of the statute, is break down the grade configurations of the nearest schools, and then sort of allocate the funds based on their grade compared to those specific grades. So that's what we did in accordance with the intent. But that's one example, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the charter grant distributions as recommended by the State Board of Education?
So moved.
Second.
Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The next item is the final approval of the A to F adult high school rule. And before I hear the speakers, I want to have Maggie, who works with our A to F accountability, to ask one question. And Cynthia, if you might be available to answer it for clarification.
Good morning. So actually, Cynthia and I discussed this on the break. One of the issues that we had from an implementation standpoint at the department is the time frame for reporting that is stated in the rule regarding the graduates for, I think it's student enrollment to a graduate percentage ratio that's in there. For the calculation, they give the adult high schools a timeline of reporting by August 1st, which we utilize at the department for determining graduation rates and graduates the statutory timeline, which defines a reporting year as October 1st to September 30th. So when we determine graduates, we give schools until September 30th to report those students. So this timeline kind of adjusts that and bumps the timeline for these adult high schools to report till August 1st, and it's also only stated in this graduation percentage. It's not stated in the graduation rate calculation in this rule, so you could end up with two different numbers of graduates if this reporting period is incorporated in there. So we kind of discussed it in the hallway, and I think kind of the resolution is because of the adult high schools, The August 1st deadline could be a technical change where it's incorporated in the graduation rate as well. If this is what the adult high schools want, the board want, and the Attorney General approves it and says it's not in conflict with statute, we'll implement it. But I think ultimately that was our biggest issue.
So my question to Cynthia, perhaps to follow up, so was the August 1 date put in there after public comment? So the schools, that's why I'm waiting for these schools to come up and talk. Are they aware that they will need to report their data by August 1 instead of September 30th as in statute?
I was asked to specifically work with, or we were asked to specifically work with the programs when we developed this rule. And yes, before any change was made, I looped in the Excel centers and made sure, discussed with them, because this was something that they were recommending. Well, the actual date was put in due to their recommendation for an earlier, and then it ended up being a conversation with Maggie as to what that date should be, and so I looped them in as to what was a reasonable date for them.
Because as I was reading the comments and how they were implemented, I didn't see anything about having an earlier date, and that's why I'm asking the question. I just want to be sure these schools are aware that they're not going to have till September 30th to graduate their students.
Again, we are landing on this being a technical issue that we think we can discuss further. Where they wanted was an August 1st date for their grad to enrollment percentages so that they were able to get current year students included, and their grad rate was still going to be in arrears, and which again, I think needs to lead to further discussion, but grad rate always being in arrears versus their grad to enrollment, which would be current year, they didn't necessarily have an issue with their grad rate being the September 30th. It's more, Maggie is raising an issue that I think we need to just work out as a technical issue, which we believe we can make it a technical issue and make sure we include the Excel centers in the different programs in this discussion.
So we don't need to change any language
Not at this point, no.
to move forward. Is that your interpretation also, Maggie? Because I don't want to be passing a rule in which
The only other
we can't
question I
follow.
have is that the rule does have language that says that the graduation rate is based on the school year being assessed, which would not lead to it being calculated based on a year in arrears.
So I just need to be clear about the graduation piece because it's very key to all of this.
Right, and that's mostly we just need it for clarification for implementation purposes. And that really lends itself to how the language is written. So if that date's in there, and if there is language saying that the graduation rate is used based on the year being assessed, that's going to impact our ability to calculate the graduation rate and get the data in, to get that done within the timeline that this requires, that this rule requires.
So are you requesting that we change something in the language, Maggie?
I think the only thing is that I think there just needs to be clarifying language that the graduation rate is not being assessed based on the year being assessed, that it is actually in arrears. And that as long as that is clarified, if they want the graduation to enrollment percentage to be based on different data than the graduation rate, that's what it would ultimately lend itself to. That would also then yield a new data collection, which would probably have to go to the data collection committee for review, because that would be a new separate collection for us at the department, to be able to collect that graduation number for the year being assessed.
So Cynthia,
We still believe this is a technical issue that we need to hammer back. We've gone back and forth on this. We are confident that it is minor. It's a technical issue. I'm not comfortable making any change without continuing to loop in the adult ed programs as we were directed by the board to do.
well, I totally agree with that. That's why I'm delaying their comment, because this August 1 date was put in here after the public comment period. So I just want to be sure everybody's on the same page, because the graduation pieces have a big impact on the calculation of grades. So as I read it, we are going to, says to obtain a graduation calculation, a school must have at least 10 students graduate in the school year being assessed. So it is the intent of this to use the current graduation year, not in arrears, correct? I just don't want any issues when we start to calculate grades. Is there, my druthers is if there's something we need to get worked out technically in the language, we should go ahead and do that. Is there some need that we have to approve it today? Yes, no? Grades are too important to schools. I don't want to.
I'm sorry, this involves a technical change to the rule?
I believe so.
Yeah, we can make technical changes after the fact. Those are non-substantive changes.
Okay, that was my question is, but I'm not sure it's not substantive because we inserted a date here that wasn't in the public comment to have inserted. Earlier than the September 30th date that's in law.
If that's a change we all agree with, then the board could approve the rule subject to that, as long as it's on the record.
Okay, I just want to be sure we're procedurally heading where we need to head. So, all right, Scott Bess? No problem. Are you speaking on his behalf? Oh, you're up too? Okay. Dan Scott?
Thank you. I apologize on behalf of my colleague, Scott Bess. Unfortunately, he had a work matter he had to go attend to. But my name, like I said, is Dan Scott. I work with Goodwill Education, which operates 80% of the adult high schools in Indiana. Just to give you a little bit of background on the population, we work directly with students 18 to 80. This population is 75% receive free, or 75% receive some form of welfare. Many more are in households that receive welfare. 53% of our students have children at home. Where over 70% are unemployed. And those that do go through our program and graduate 90% of them do so within 18 months, which is why we have built into the rule this grad to enrollment piece instead of using solely cohort. With that said, we actually have just around 20% of our students that actually belong to an active cohort. So just to clarify and to address one of the issues that was brought up just before I came here to speak, we feel strongly that the August 1 date should be included in the rule and was actually implied throughout. We were all well aware over the 3-year-long process to get this to become a rule that this would have to happen. Some change like this would have to happen. And as I said, this has been a 3-year-long process. We've dealt with multiple iterations of this board. We've had current and previous board members. We've worked with them as well as DWD, DOE, the various charter authorizers, and obviously DOORS and other adult high school providers. With that said, because most of our graduates, 80% in fact, do not belong to an active cohort, that it should not be problematic for us to go ahead and use that August 1 cutoff date. Where the only way we'd have any issues would be that 20% that do fall in a current cohort, but then if you look at the model as a whole, they come out to equal only 4 percentage points out of the 100 percentage points a school can receive. So it's such a minor component, it really is of no real concern to us. With that said, as I said before, and I'd like to reiterate, it has been a 3-year-long process that has included many various entities along the way. As a result, we feel strongly that for the best interest of the schools, as well as the students we serve, that the board should take action today about the rule that's in front of you and the changes that are included in the rule that you have before you. When you deal with this population, you're asking them to put their lives on hold and to make a decision on whether or not to go to school and which adult high school to choose. It's important for them to have as much information as possible. And this rule and the components within it, specifically the CCR components, are extremely important to them. And to deny them any further delay in this information would really be an injustice to them. So just to clarify, I do feel strongly that, and my colleagues as well, that the rule in front of you is a good rule. It's probably a rule that should be and could be easily replicated in other states that are now actively adding adult high schools because of the success we've had here in Indiana. and that you guys, we'd really strongly feel that you should be, vote in favor of that today. And that the issues brought up beforehand are rather minor and things that we already all knew ahead of time and we all feel comfortable with. Again, the September 30th date right now for graduates really doesn't make a difference to us. Realistically, all of our school years across the board for adult high schools end before July 1. So as a result, all we really do, the difference between July and September is really just a lag that we don't really use at all for graduates. Any students that, obviously if you don't graduate by July 1, then we don't count you. We automatically enroll them into the following school year. In fact, for our school in particular, the Excel Centers, our students are actually in their second term by the time that September 30th date is used. So in fact, realistically, it really should be August 1, the date used for adult high schools, regardless.
Thank you very much for addressing the issue. Thank you. There's a motion to approve the final A to F high school rule, adult high school rule. Is there a second? Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Next item is the approval of the 2016 State Board of Education meeting dates. There's a motion to approve the 2016 State Board of Education meeting dates. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I'm going to ask what the pleasure
Can I ask a question real quick? Sorry, I should have asked this before.
on meeting dates?
Yes, on meeting date, sorry. Where it says consider moving to March 16th, are we not considering that now? Or should we still leave that as a,
Is that something?
I apologize, I should have asked that in discussion and didn't get it done.
Is that
That's
something we can look at in February and kind of see where we are?
Yeah,
That's
that's what we
what I'm
typically
asking.
do.
That's been past practice was.
Yeah, that's
And
what we
bring them
typically
back
do.
because we can schedule based on your guys' needs, so.
Okay, I just wanted to know if we needed to tentatively work for that, toward that too, so, thank you.
Bring it back, yep.
So I'm going to ask the board's pleasure. The lunch has arrived, but it's about 11, almost 11:40, and we just have discussion left. So do you want to continue, or do you want to have a lunch break?
Can we do a 5-minute?
A 5-minute break?
Break.
Okay, so let's resume back here at 11:45. And if you want to bring your lunch to eat while we're meeting, you can.